What's up YouTube, Zero here, and today I have an absolutely amazing Entei EX and Salazzle deck in Pokemon TCG Pocket. In this video, I'll go over the deck build that you can see on the left hand side of the screen. I'll talk about each of these cards individually, and I'll talk about why this deck is absolutely amazing. Before I get into it, as always, if you do enjoy this video, feel free to give it a thumbs up and hit that subscribe button for more Pokemon TCG content. I do a bunch of other video games, so feel free to check those out as well. Borderlands 4 is dropping soon, and I am going to be playing that a lot. I am going to be posting videos on that, so just be aware that if you're a Borderlands fan, be on the lookout for that. Without further ado, let's talk about this deck. The first question on your mind probably is, why are you only running one Entei EX? The answer is simple. I've only unlocked one Entei EX. If I could have two in this deck, I would, but I haven't been fortunate enough to get two yet. But I did want to come out with this deck with this combination of Pokemon Entei EX and Salazzle because this combination is absolutely awesome. If I could have two in this deck, I would, and I would probably drop either one of my Cyruses, or I would drop perhaps an Elemental Switch. I would probably drop one of those, maybe even dropping a Sabrina. I would drop something to get a second Entei EX into this deck, just because it can be insanely powerful and its ability is great as well. So being able to get Entei EX onto the battlefield, start powering it up, and even if it's in that active slot, utilizing Legendary Pulse is really nice as well. But since I'm already talking about Entei EX, let's talk about it more in depth. So Entei EX came out in the Secluded Springs packs. It has an ability and a move, so its ability is Legendary Pulse. At the end of your turn, if this Pokemon is in the active spot, draw a card. It's nothing flashy, but it's a phenomenal ability. Of course, going through your deck quickly, getting the cards you need out of your deck quickly is always going to be a benefit. It's always going to be great when you're facing an opponent that's not drawing cards as quickly, because you're going to be able to implement your strategy, get the cards you need before your opponent is able to get the cards they need. So of course, this ability, although nothing flashy, is going to be phenomenal. And of course, all of the legendary dogs have this ability in which at the end of your turn, you get to draw a card if the legendary dog is in the active spot. So Entei EX's, Suicune EX's, and Raikou EX's abilities are all the same, but all phenomenal, in which you can draw a card at the end of your turn. Next, Entei EX has Blazing Beatdown for 2 fire energy. It deals 60 damage. However, if you have 2 more fire energy, that means if you have 4 fire energy on Entei EX, Blazing Beatdown does 60 more damage. So Blazing Beatdown can do 120 damage for 4 fire energy. Either you're doing 60 damage for 2 fire energy, or you're doing 120 damage for 4 fire energy. That's not necessarily great, but you do have the opportunity to deal 120 if you do get those 4 fire energies onto Entei. Entei is a fairly decent Pokemon. Legendary Pulse allows you to draw cards. While you're drawing cards, you get to implement your strategy, and with a little bit of help, you can get Entei EX to those 4 energies, but it does take a little bit of help. Let's talk about the second Pokemon in this deck, and then I'll talk about the help that Entei needs or can get in order to get to those 4 fire energy. So I want to talk about Salazzle. Salazzle is actually a pretty fun and pretty good card, which was only enhanced with the Pokemon tool Memory Light. And I'll talk about Memory Light right after I talk about Salazzle. So Salazzle, for 2 fire energy, has Heated Poison. This deals 30 damage, and at first glance, 30 damage, 2 energy, you're thinking this is an absolutely awful move. However, until you read what it does. Your opponent's active Pokemon is now poisoned and burned. So at the end of the turn that you attack with Heated Poison, you're at least getting 10 extra damage from poison and 20 extra damage from the burn. So now Heated Poison deals at least 60 damage. If your opponent fails to clear the burn, of course they get to flip a coin to try and clear the burn, but if they fail to clear it, you now deal 30 damage at the end of your opponent's turn. So the damage can really add up with both the poison and the burn. So that's really awesome as well, is that you can status condition a lot of Pokemon. You're going to really force your opponent into a corner. Your opponent is now going to have to determine, well, do I retreat these Pokemon that have 2 status condition on them? If your opponent doesn't have any form of healing that can get rid of those status conditions, it's gonna be difficult for your opponent to really leave their Pokemon in that active slot and take all of that building damage. They might, but it's gonna be really difficult for your opponent, and you're really gonna force your opponent into a lot of retreats, losing a lot of energy, so you can build up the energy on your Salazzle and your Entei, so you can have them ready to go as the match progresses, and eventually have your Entei locked and loaded for that 120 damage. And Salazzle is going to be found in the Celestial Guardians packs. Now I want to talk about Memory Light briefly, the tool that I mentioned earlier, and then I'll talk about why it's phenomenal for Salazzle and Salandit. So Memory Light, this was also released in the Secluded Springs packs that Entei was released in. The Pokemon this card is attached to can use any attack from its previous evolutions. So there are certain Pokemon in Pokemon TCG Pocket that really benefit from Memory Light. There's certain Pokemon that don't benefit at all from it. So you really have to pick and choose what deck you put Memory Light in. But there are Pokemon like Salazzle that highly benefits from Memory Light. So as Memory Light stated, you can utilize an attack from a previous evolution. So now let's look at Salandit and its move. So Salandit, for 1 colorless energy, has Venoshock. Deals 10 damage. However, if your opponent's active Pokemon is poisoned, this attack deals 40 more damage. So Venoshock can deal 50 damage. So now, if your Salazzle has Memory Light attached, if your opponent's active Pokemon is poisoned, you don't have to worry about the burn. The burn is really nice additive, but if your opponent's active Pokemon is poisoned, if your opponent failed to clear the poison, and remember, poison stays. There is no coin flip that gets rid of poison. So your opponent has to act to get rid of poison. That means they have to retreat their Pokemon, they have to utilize Pokemon Center Lady or another healing agent to clear their Pokemon of that poison. But as long as your opponent's Pokemon is poisoned, Venoshock is going to deal 50 damage. So now, if your Salazzle does have Memory Light, you can deal that 50 damage from Venoshock, which is going to be a nice combination. So you already poison your opponent's Pokemon with Salazzle's Heated Poison, and now you're utilizing Venoshock from your Salandit that can deal 50 damage. So that damage is really going to add up, especially if your opponent fails to clear the poison and fails to clear the burn. That's going to be a lot of damage, really adding up really quickly, and your opponent is going to be caught off guard with all of that damage, dealing 30 damage from both your poison and your burn, and then the extra 20 damage, because Heated Poison deals 30, Venoshock deals 50, so it's an extra 20 damage. That extra 20 damage from Venoshock, you can really add up damage really quickly, and your opponent is going to be caught off guard if they don't act quickly into retreating their Pokemon or finding a way to get rid of that poison and burn. So that's really nice, and all the while your opponent is retreating, which is costing them energy or it's costing them their support cards, you're going to be building up that energy on Entei EX so you can get ready to deal 120 damage if necessary. So I absolutely love this combination, and Memory Light really works well for Salazzle. It's one of the Pokemon that it does really combine well with. And Salandit, this Salandit is going to be found in the Mythical Islands packs. So do be aware of that. This Salandit is in the Mythical Islands packs, while the Salazzle can be found in the Celestial Guardians packs. So you do have to grind 2 different packs to get both of these Pokemon, the pre-evolution and the evolution, but if you do and you get them, it's going to be a phenomenal pairing when you are able to get them into a deck and start attacking. So the last Pokemon in this deck, Magby. Magby is awesome for any deck that requires fire energy, has Toasty Toss. Take a fire energy from your energy zone and attach it to one of your benched Pokemon. And of course, because it's a baby Pokemon, it does not require energy to attach a fire energy. That means if you get the start, you get turn 1, start 1, you get to attach a fire energy without having to worry about getting an energy from the energy zone to start the battle. So that's really nice. Baby Pokemon, especially the ones that can take an energy from the energy zone, are really important in the game right now and can really put you in the right direction to start the match. And Magby can be found in the Wisdom of Sea and Sky Ho-Oh packs. Next, couple of the basic cards that are in pretty much every deck. Pokeball, you put a random basic Pokemon from your deck into your hand, and then Professor's Research, draw 2 cards. Next, let's talk about Elemental Switch. Elemental Switch is phenomenal for this deck for several reasons, especially with Entei. So Elemental Switch, you move a fire, water, or electric. Of course, in this case, it's only going to be fire because this deck only deals with fire. Move a fire energy from one of your benched Pokemon to your active Pokemon. This is going to be phenomenal, especially for Entei EX. So Entei EX, we already talked about. It requires 4 energy, but then you're hitting for 120. You don't lose energy, you keep those 4 energy for as long as the battle goes on, barring any Pokemon or support card your opponent may have that gets rid of energy. You're going to keep those 4 energy and you're attacking for 120. Elemental Switch, if there's a Pokemon on your bench that you no longer require energy on, you can utilize Elemental Switch to take that fire energy, put it on your Entei, and start attacking for 120. Maybe your Salazzle was in the active spot and dealing a bunch of damage, but now it's time for your Entei to attack. You can retreat your Salazzle, so of course you lose 1 energy to retreat, but then you can utilize Elemental Switch on that last energy on your Salazzle, move it to your Entei that's now in the active spot, and attack for 120. So you can get an extra energy a little bit quicker by utilizing Elemental Switch. That's why I have 2 in this deck. It is pretty important to have, so that's why I like running 2. Again, if I did run a second Entei, when I do get the second Entei, I'm probably going to still run 2 Elemental Switches. I think what I'm going to do is get rid of either 1 Cyrus or 1 Sabrina, just because I do really like the Elemental Switch, because getting your Entei going for 120 is going to be really nice to have. So Elemental Switch in this deck is phenomenal and really going to get your Entei going a lot quicker. And Elemental Switch can be found in the Wisdom of Sea and Sky Lugia packs. Next, I have mentioned them several times throughout this video already, Sabrina and Cyrus. Sabrina, you switch out your opponent's active Pokemon to the bench. Your opponent does get to choose the new active Pokemon. And Cyrus, you switch in one of your opponent's benched Pokemon that has damage on it to the active spot. Both of these are very good for this deck. I already mentioned that Salazzle is most likely going to force your opponent into a retreat. A lot of opponents are not going to like 2 status conditions on their active Pokemon. So being poisoned and being burned, your opponent is most likely going to try and find a way of retreating their active Pokemon. This is going to set up a lot of Cyrus plays because Pokemon on the bench of your opponent are going to have damage on it. It's going to allow you to take those Pokemon, put them into the active slot, and finish them off. Whether it's with your Salazzle, where you can poison and burn that Pokemon again and start dealing more damage on them, or whether it's finishing them off with your Entei dealing 120 damage. On top of that, if your opponent's Pokemon does have a high retreat cost and a high move cost, and they utilize some of their energy already to retreat their Pokemon, they may not even be able to attack. So they may just be sitting there in the active spot taking damage while they're trying to figure out if they sacrifice that Pokemon, if they try to build up enough energy to attack or retreat, whatever they decide to do, but it's really going to mess with your opponent's strategy. Sabrina, same. It's going to mess with your opponent's strategy as well. You can force a Pokemon out of that active slot that you don't want to deal with, or perhaps force a Pokemon to the active slot that you do want to deal with, or maybe you just mess with your opponent's Pokemon, your opponent's strategy, based off of where they have been applying energy. Sabrina has a lot of great uses. It is a really great card to have, not just in this deck, but really any deck. Sabrina is going to be found in the Genetic Apex Charizard packs, and Cyrus is going to be found in the Space-Time Smackdown Palkia packs. Last but not least is Mars. Mars can sometimes be crucial. Let's be honest, sometimes it does not help, but sometimes Mars can be crucial. So Mars, your opponent shuffles their hand into their deck. They draw a card for each of their remaining points needed to win. So if your opponent, like my opponent in this situation, has 2 points and you utilize Mars, now they can only draw 1 card. So depending on how the game is playing out, you may really cripple your opponent. Making them only draw 1 card, you could really get a card that they may need to utilize. Perhaps it was a Sabrina or a Cyrus that I just talked about, and I'm going to force it out of their hand and they don't have one, so they can't get to one of my weakened Pokemon on the bench. Perhaps it was a Lily that can heal up 60 HP, in which I'm forcing my opponent not to be allowed to heal up. That's another great use of Mars that can force your opponent into a low hand. Of course, it doesn't always work out. Sometimes you push a card into your opponent's hand that they needed, but it can sometimes greatly benefit you. So sometimes having Mars is really nice to have, and that's why I like having Mars in this deck. And Mars can be found in the Space-Time Smackdown Palkia packs. This combination of Salazzle and Entei EX is really fun and can win you a lot of games. Salazzle is phenomenal because it can both poison and burn your opponent's active Pokemon. On top of that, with Memory Light, utilize the Venoshock from Salandit to deal extra damage to your opponent's Pokemon. The damage can really build up quickly, especially if your opponent fails to clear burn on its initial coin flip. So first you get the 30 from your attack, you get the 30 from both the poison and the burn, so that's 60. If your opponent fails to clear the poison and burn at the start of their turn, or by the end of their turn, they can take another 30 damage, so now you're up to 90 damage. If you hit them with a Venoshock, that's another 50. So now you can really hit them with 140 damage even before the end of your turn. Then at the end of your turn, again, if they didn't clear the poison and burn, you add another 30. So now we're up to 170 damage after just a few turns. So that's pretty awesome. And it's going to force your opponent into trying to retreat their Pokemon, trying to heal their Pokemon. All the while, you're going to be building up energy on Entei EX, getting ready to attack for 120 when you need to. Magby is going to be great to start the match, so you can start building up that fire energy on your Entei or your Salandit. Pokeball, Professor's Research, just a great way to draw cards out of your deck, and so is Entei with its ability Legendary Pulse. Memory Light, phenomenal for Salazzle. Of course, we mentioned it earlier. Elemental Switch, great to get that fire energy from the bench Pokemon onto your Entei, and a couple of supporter cards that are really going to help you in the long run. But let me know in the comments section what you think of this deck. Are you going to check it out after watching this video? I'm having a blast with it. I bet y'all you will too. Let me know in the comment section if there's a Pokemon you want to see a video of, and I'll get it done. Well, thanks for sticking around, and until next time, peace.